look this up. This is on record. You can Google this. But there was a treaty to be signed with 13 of the tribes of Mount Shasta. This is in 1851. The night before, they had a big feast. The day of the signing, the soldiers said they were going to cook a big meal for the Indians, for the celebration. At that meal, 3,000 braves were poisoned. They put strychnine in the beef and in the bread. There were only 150 survivors at that massacre, one of which was named Tyree Jim, which is a little boy. He was allowed to watch it. But what he said was that most of the braves died there at the signing, and some on the trail on the way home, and that he and who the others that were left picked up the remains and took back the Indians back to the village to be buried.
Jeez.
In the following year, in 1852, and this is all you can look this all up. I want anyone listening to this to challenge whatever I'm saying, to research it, because they'll realize why the Indians are on reservations today. But in the 1852 census, there were only 27 Shasta Indians left in that area. Thereafter, it was decided upon by our government that all the Indians must be put on reservations to keep the most guarded secret, so that way history would not have to be rewritten.
Did they find anything that would have shown high technology?
J.C. Brown claimed that he found it. He found metals that could not be duplicated in 1900. Now, he was a civil engineer that was part of the building of the. There was in Mexico at the time. He built the Trans-Isthmian Railroad at Tijuana, Mexico, and this railroad went across from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific side, and this was about 10 years ahead of the Panama Canal. So here was an engineer who was very, very astute in metals, in building, and he was convinced that this was from ancient civilization many, many thousands of years ago.
All right, let's go to the phones. Let's go to east of the Rockies. Ray, you're on Coast to Coast with us. Hi there.
Hi, George. And yes, I did feel the earthquake this morning, too.
Yeah, out there, and you're out in Taylorville, right? Illinois?
Right.
Okay.
My question / comment would be, that story sounds a lot familiar to the story you was telling about the guy that flew his plane over Antarctica.
That was Admiral Byrd.
Admiral Byrd, correct, yes.
And met some people there in the earth or something similar to it, and it makes me think that this is not an isolated type thing, that maybe this is, quite a few places around the globe that this could be happening.
There are many places that this is happening. If you and I've read the Hollow Earth theory. And a matter of fact, I read it after I wrote this manuscript that I wrote and this research. But the Admiral Byrd theory came thereafter. But I said, it's interesting that this comes up because our planes today aren't allowed to fly over the North or South Pole. No commercial flights are allowed, and you just wonder why.
Did they have some kind of light source, according to J.C. Brown? I mean, if you look at, the Journey to the Center of the Earth movie, there was a little sun in the center, the core.
Well, he did, in the legend, he did not make reference to that. So, in everything that I got, I would say I can't say unequivocally yes or say no. I was not made privy to that information by the research that I got. That I don't know.
So we don't know if they had an energy source that created light. We just don't know. Right.
What we do know is that there was a civilization that he claimed he found there that was ancient. He claimed the Lemurian, and he claimed that they were a technically advanced civilization that was still living within the hollows of the earth.
And they may still be there.
Yes.
West of the Rockies, you're on Coast to Coast with us. Hi there.
Hi, George.
Hey.
I had a brief comment and a question.
Sure.
Also, it does sound like the story of the guy that in Death Valley that stumbled on some stuff and tried to mark the entrance and then couldn't find it. Sounded a lot like that story. But I was wondering if you were familiar with James Churchward, and he'd written a bunch of volumes of books on Mu. My mother was a Rosicrucian. She had them in her house. They described different kinds of beings that lived under there that supposedly they had left. Some of them had left. But one type of being was about 7 foot tall, and it had, instead of eyes, they had like a light-sensitive gland across their forehead. And I didn't take James Churchward very seriously, but then a friend of my sister's who knew nothing, had never heard of Lemuria, went up to Mount Shasta, and she was wandering around on the mountain, and she felt this high intelligence that kind of scared her. And she looked over the top of the bushes, and there were these 7 foot high beings with no eyes and a gland across their forehead. And she immediately sunk into this sleep and woke up a couple hours later. And the next day, she found a cave that was illuminated. She couldn't find the source of illumination, and she felt the same kind of high energy. She went home and told her boyfriend, and he knew about Lemuria. He ran up there, and of course, nothing happened to him. But I was kind of surprised that because I didn't really believe those books when I read them when I was a teenager at my mother's house. But I wondered if you're familiar with James Churchward.
Well, I'm familiar with him because in my research, that was one of the books that I pulled to understand Lemuria, because once I discovered that this individual did exist, he went up to the mountain, I was able to figure out actually how it happened. I says, well, now let me just look more into the research, because J.B. Body claimed, or J.C. Brown claimed, that he spent 30 years researching Lemuria. So Churchward's books was one of the first books that I was able to research, and I read that almost from cover to cover to understand what I was really dealing with in writing this story.
Somewhere along the line, there's got to be a family of J.B. Body or J.C. Brown, and they may know more about this, Stephen.
Well, it would be J.B. Body, and he died in Scotland. His heirs were in Scotland. I have here in front of me, I have his memoirs that I pulled from the book I told you about. But in the memoirs, at the end of it, it talks about, his wife. His wife was the one who was left, and his son had died before that. But here, I'll read it to you.
Sure.
John Benjamin Body was born on February 27, 1867 at Megavesi, Cornwall, England. He was the son of John and Mary Ann Harris Body. He was educated at the City of London College under Professor Harry Adams. So he was an educated man. He spent 6 years of training in Great Britain. He then proceeded to Mexico and worked for the Lloyd Cowdery Mining Company until his death. He devoted his whole life to the interests of one firm from 1890 to 1940. And he identified himself with Lloyd Pearson and Son Limited Civil Engineering Contractors, which, as I mentioned earlier, Lord Wheatman Pearson became the first Viscount Cowdery, and that's where the Lloyd Cowdery name came from, Lloyd Cowdery Mining Company.
So what's next? The book, the movie? What will happen to the legend of J.C. Brown?
Well, right now, I'm trying to get my agent to find me someone to make the movie. This is, I was on the Susan Northrup show 2 weeks ago, which I know you've had her on your show before.
Yeah.
And she had told me 30 years ago, George, that I was going to write a book. I was in her audience. She picked me out of the audience, believe it or not, and she said that 30 years later, I was in midlife, I was going to write a story that was going to be very well received by the world, and that a man by the name of Michael would help me. Well,
I'll tell you what. Get some more information to producer Lisa for me, Stephen, and I'll try to send it to a couple people I know as well that might be able to help you. It's an incredible story. Stephen Sindoni, our guest. I'll be back in a moment now. Open lines on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, and welcome back now. We've got open lines. Let's go to the phones. We'll go to our wild card line. You're up. Hello there.
Hi.
Where are you calling from?
Akron, Ohio.
Well, welcome to the program. What's up?
Well, I wanted to say that I have been to Mount Shasta.
Tell me about it.
Did some hiking on it. I was at a conference out there at the foot of it. And I wanted to ask that guest if he had ever heard of Guy Ballard. He was the founder of the I Am movement that was very popular back in the 30s. He had purportedly met Saint Germain on Mount Shasta had a very mystical encounter with